The Operator Log, Episode 5. What we observe. Markets that work. The best market for an autonomous business is not a new one, it is an old one that runs badly. Last week, we argued that Arco does not build MVPs because we only enter markets where demand is already proven. That claim carries a burden. If the market selection method is not rigorous enough to replace viability testing, the no MVP position collapses. So, this episode delivers the method. What makes a market an Arco target is not an intuition, it is a measurement. Specifically, the proportion of a market's gross margin consumed by human labor. When that proportion crosses 60%, the market passes our primary filter. Below that threshold, it does not matter how large the market is or how slow the incumbent appears. Above it, the operational case for autonomous reconstruction is structural, and the arithmetic is on our side before the first line of code is written. This is the operator log. The primary trap in the venture world is the obsession with innovation. Not because innovation is wrong, the companies that created new categories have generated some of the largest returns in the history of capital allocation. The trap is the assumption that new categories are the only place where outsized returns are available. That assumption has a specific cost. It forces founders into markets where demand does not yet exist, customers do not yet understand the need, and the primary risk is whether the market materializes at all. The counterargument to everything Arco does is usually framed as a market sophistication objection. Proven markets are crowded markets. Incumbents in those markets have scale, distribution, existing customer relationships, and years of operational experience. How does a new entrant compete against that? The answer depends entirely on what the entrant is competing on. It is a reasonable concern for a company competing on product features. You are trying to out-execute an incumbent on its own terms. It is irrelevant for a company competing on operational architecture. An autonomous business does not need to out-feature the incumbent. It needs to deliver the same output at a structurally lower cost. Those are different competitions, with different advantages, and the incumbent scale is not an advantage in the second one. In many cases, it is a liability. Here is what we observe in the service sectors that Arco targets. In logistics coordination, the incumbent employs a large team of human coordinators managing freight movement through phone calls, emails, and relationship management. In back-office compliance processing, the incumbent runs operations through chains of human reviewers, applying fixed regulatory rules to deterministic documents. In professional services brokerage, the incumbent connects supply and demand through experienced humans who hold institutional knowledge that has never been encoded in a system. In each case, the business is profitable. In each case, the primary input, the thing the business is actually selling, is human coordination, not proprietary technology, not network effects, not brand coordination. That pattern is observable across industries and has been documented consistently in service sector employment and cost data. The markets that fit this profile are not niche. They are large, stable, and have been operating with the same structural cost architecture for decades. Nobody has rebuilt them because the incumbents generating revenue from them have no incentive to. The margin is comfortable. The customers keep paying. The human-heavy model has worked for long enough that disrupting it feels unnecessary from the inside. Arco does not start with ideas. We start with the evidence of inefficiency. We look for markets where the delivery of value requires a high volume of human handoffs, approvals, and coordination steps that could be replaced by deterministic agentic logic. Not because we hypothesize that the market could be rebuilt more efficiently, but because the cost structure of the incumbent makes the arithmetic of reconstruction obvious before the research phase is complete. Venture capital bets on innovation. Arco bets on inefficiency. The distinction determines the risk profile of every decision that follows. Every market Arco considers is evaluated against a primary metric, the human-to-logic ratio. It is the proportion of gross margin consumed by human labor costs, the wages, benefits, management overhead, and coordination infrastructure required to deliver the core service. When that proportion exceeds 60%, the market passes Arco's primary filter. A 60% labor to margin ratio means the business is selling human coordination, not a product or a system. The customer is paying primarily for the hours of people required to move information, make decisions, and hand work from one person to the next. That is the market structure where autonomous reconstruction is not just possible, it is arithmetically obvious. Replace the coordination with deterministic logic, and the cost of the next unit of revenue approaches zero. This is the operational definition of operational arbitrage, the gap between what an industry earns and what it costs an autonomous operator to deliver the same output. We seeded this term in episode 2, and it becomes the primary lens in this one. In a market where human labor accounts for more than 60% of gross margin, the incumbent's cost structure is the arbitrage. Arco's architecture eliminates that cost structure. The margin difference is the business case, stated as an arithmetic fact rather than a growth projection. The counter-argument from established venture investors is that autonomous reconstruction requires the same output quality as the incumbent, that agents cannot match the judgment of experienced human coordinators. This objection is correct at Tier 3. It is wrong at Tiers 1 and 2. The T-tier framework we introduced in episode 1 applies directly here. The 60% labor threshold almost always identifies markets where the majority of coordination work is a Tier 1, deterministic, scripted, high volume, or Tier 2, conditional reasoning within defined constraints. The judgment work is present, but it is a fraction of the total. The 60% labor cost is not the cost of expertise. It is the cost of a coordination overhead applied at scale to work that does not require expert judgment at most of its steps. To make this concrete, consider a logistics brokerage. The incumbent employs a team of coordinators whose working day consists of matching freight with carriers, confirming availability, resolving scheduling exceptions, and updating status across multiple parties. Each coordinator handles a bounded number of transactions per day, constrained by the hours available and the cognitive overhead of managing concurrent variables. The coordination tax in that business is substantial. Most of the operating cost is human attention applied to deterministic matching logic. An autonomous business replaces those coordinators with an agentic system that executes the matching, confirms the booking, escalates the genuine exceptions, and closes the loop, all without a human in the workflow. The revenue is the same. The cost structure is not improved. It is replaced. The arbitrage compounds over time because of a structural asymmetry that has no historical precedent. The cost of compute is falling on a consistent structural trajectory, and the cost of human labor is not. A market that qualifies at the 60% threshold today qualifies more strongly in 12 months, not because the incumbent has gotten worse, but because the cost of the autonomous alternative has decreased further. The structural advantage is time-dependent in a direction that permanently favors the autonomous operator. This is not a claim about AI hype. It is an observation about the direction of two cost curves that are moving in opposite directions. The human-to-logic ratio is the primary filter. When a market clears 60%, 4 secondary signals determine whether it is an Arco target. The first signal is decade-long demand stability. We are not looking for a growing market. We are looking for a market that has been paying consistently for the same underlying service for at least 10 years, ideally through at least one economic cycle. Stable demand is evidence that the need is structural, not discretionary. Customers who kept paying during a downturn are customers whose relationship with the service is non-negotiable. That is the risk profile we want. a floor on demand that does not depend on economic conditions being favorable. The second signal is high market fragmentation. If the top 5 incumbents collectively hold less than 40% of the market, no single player has achieved a structural moat. Fragmentation is the observable outcome when a market is held together by inertia rather than by genuine competitive advantage. It means the incumbents are all viable, all generating margin, but none has found a way to compound their advantage into defensibility. That is the condition where an architectural entrant can take share without fighting an entrenched moat. The third signal is low technological adoption among market leaders. If the largest operators are still running on legacy ERP systems with large middle management layers and high volumes of email-based coordination to move data from one point to another, the reconstruction opportunity is intact. Nobody has moved in yet, or the attempts that have been made have added AI to the existing architecture rather than replacing it. Low adoption signals that the coordination tax is still running at full rate and the arbitrage has not yet been captured. The fourth signal is the absence of regulatory barriers at the Tier 1 task level. The routine, high-volume, scripted work that drives the revenue loop in an autonomous business must be executable by agents without mandatory human review on every transaction. Where regulation requires a human signature on each individual output, not on the system design, but on the individual output, the arbitrage is constrained at exactly the layer where autonomous architecture is most efficient. We avoid markets where that regulatory constraint applies to Tier 1. We build in markets where human oversight is required at the exception level, not at the transaction level. That is the condition where MTTI can exceed 72 hours, where the architecture can run the revenue loop autonomously for days at a time. The markets Arco avoids are as important as the ones it targets. We do not enter auto markets where the competition is building features. We do not enter blue ocean markets that require educating the customer on why they need the service. We do not enter early-stage categories where demand has not yet been documented. We do not want to explain why someone needs what we sell. We want to offer them something they already buy, delivered more efficiently than any human-centric operator can match. The logistics brokerage market illustrates all four signals passing simultaneously. Decade-long demand stability. Freight movement is a structural need of the global economy and has been generating consistent commercial activity for generations. High fragmentation. The market is served by thousands of regional and specialist brokers with no dominant player holding structural market share. Low technological adoption. The largest freight brokers still run significant portions of their operations through human coordinators using legacy systems and the high-volume phone and email workflows. Absence of Tier 1 regulatory barriers. Freight, matching, and booking confirmation are not individually regulated transactions requiring human sign-off. All four signals pass. The human-to-logic ratio in a traditional freight brokerage typically exceeds 65% of gross margin. The market qualifies on every criterion, and it has qualified for decades while incumbents have continued extracting margin from a structurally broken delivery model. How does Arco select markets for autonomous business reconstruction? Arco targets proven markets where human labor accounts for more than 60% of gross margin, industries where the primary cost to the incumbent is human coordination rather than technology or capital. This is Arco's human-to-logic ratio threshold. When the threshold is met, the coordination tax embedded in the incumbent's cost structure becomes the operational arbitrage. An autonomous business that eliminates human-in-the-loop dependencies delivers the same output at a structurally lower cost. Four secondary signals confirm the target: decade-long demand stability, high market fragmentation, low technological adoption among market leaders, and the absence of regulatory barriers at the Tier 1 task level. Here is the position. The best market for an autonomous business is not a new one. It is an old one, run badly. Not badly in the sense of incompetence. The incumbents in these markets are often profitable and well managed within the constraints of their architecture. Badly in the sense that the architecture has never been questioned. Human coordination has been the delivery mechanism for so long that nobody inside the market has treated it as optional. Venture capital bets on innovation. Arco bets on inefficiency. We find the most expensive old problem being solved by too many people, and we rebuild the solution as a logic loop. We do not need to discover whether demand exists. The demand is documented. We do not need to educate the customer. The customer is already paying. We do not need to be lucky. We need to be more efficient than an incumbent whose coordination overhead is structural and permanent, because it cannot remove the coordination tax without dismantling the organization built around it. Episode 6 covers exactly why that dismantling is not available to them. The full written version of this argument, including the market selection criteria in full, is memo number 5, Markets That Work, on the blog at arcoventure.studio. Every term introduced in this episode is defined precisely in the Arco lexicon at arcoventure.studio/lexicon. Next week, why the incumbents in these markets cannot respond even when they see us coming. We don't need to be lucky. We just need to be more efficient. This has been episode 5 of the Operator Log.